I'm ready.
All right, we're ready. All right. I'm Kathy Obradovich, opinion editor at the Des Moines Register, and we are here with Steve Bullock, Democratic presidential candidate from Montana. Welcome, Governor Bullock.
It's great to be. Sure. Two-term governor from Montana, raised in Montana, single-parent household, sort of paycheck to paycheck. Only knew that there was a governor's house in town because I delivered newspapers to it, so I made about 4 blocks in life. But worked my way through college, borrowed my way through law school. Was Attorney General, was the first elected office I ever held, which was 2008. Elected governor in 2012, then re-elected in 2016, time where Donald Trump took Montana by 20 points, I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters also voted for Donald Trump. My legislature's a bit more Republican than yours in Iowa, but have been able to get meaningful things done, which you might talk about throughout this. But I'm running both to beat Donald Trump and make sure that ultimately our economy and this thing called representative democracy actually works for us, because I think that there's so many people that are frustrated. You look at majority of people haven't had a pay increase in 40 years, or if you're from a rural area, 2/3 of the counties in this country lost businesses over the last decade. When I was growing up in the early 70s, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents were at age 30. Today it's only about half. So folks don't feel like the economy's working for them. They turn to Washington, D.C., and kind of the fight of my career has been from AG on the corrupting influence of money in our system. Actually brought the first case after Citizens United to try to say that elections ought to be about us, not about all the outside dollars that get spent. And so many of the challenges that we're facing in D.C., I think, come right back to that. But I think that when both the economy's not working and our political system doesn't work, that's what's made folks so frustrated, anxious, and angry. We're more divided today than any time in my lifetime. This president hasn't helped that. So I want to get both working for folks, and that's why I'm running.
You talked a little bit on the Register soapbox at the state fair about being a gun owner, and you said most gun owners like yourself would be willing to support laws like universal background checks. But you come from Montana, and you haven't always supported gun control measures, at least not publicly as governor. What do you think has changed?
Well, I mean, a couple different things, and I also vetoed 14 bills that I didn't think made sense for our communities or the safety of our families or the safety of law enforcement. I think we're getting to this point where, and it's not just the mass shootings. I mean, I'll never forget it. After the Vegas shooting, I was sitting in my office being asked to lower the flags. And I said, I don't even know what to write in this proclamation. And a young coworker said, well, we now have a template for mass shootings. And we're to the point where so many people are being impacted, and families are being impacted, and communities are being impacted. So I think that we have to take action, but like this is another time where, as I've said, 40% of the households in this country have a firearm in it. Gun owners know that we ought to be taking steps to better protect people. And the majority of gun owners believe that things like universal background checks would just make sense. When I was growing up, the NRA was a gun safety organization. It was a hunting organization. Now we just saw this week with this president who, and this isn't the first time that he's done it, said, yeah, we should probably have universal background checks. The minute he talks to the head of the NRA, he walks backwards. So at some point, I think part of this goes down to, again, the corrupting influence of money in our system, but at some point, it's regular folks that got to turn around and say, we can do more.
But were you skeptical at one point that universal background checks would actually be effective for Montana?
I was, and you know, I mean,
And why has that skepticism changed that they would be that would be effective for the country?
well, I think it would in as much as that, I mean, if you look at this as a public health issue, not as a political issue, we know that too many guns escape a background check system. And every firearm I've ever purchased has been through the NICS system, which doesn't have all the data in it that it should. But it's some of these moments where, fourth of the times I've had to lower the flags, but for mass shootings, or the moments when I asked my sixth grader when he went to a new school, what did he learn his first week of school? And he talked about some things. He said, I also know now where to go in case of an active shooter. I mean, that's nothing that I had to grow up with. I think we're at this inflection point, finally, where we know that we need to take steps, and I'm one of them.
And banning assault weapons, that's something that you talked about over the weekend. I don't know how many, military-style assault weapons people have in Montana, but there's millions of them on the street in the United States. Do you feel like there should be a federal buyback program, or how do you make a dent in that store of existing guns, even if Congress were to ban assault?
No, I wouldn't do a mandatory buyback. I would do a voluntary buyback. And you could put further.
Why voluntary?
Well, I think in part because one of the reasons why we've gotten to this point is that the National Rifle Association has been really, really effective at turning around and saying, the government's going to come in and take away all of your guns. And I think we could make great steps with a whole number of different things, not just universal background checks, but extreme risk orders, fixing the NICS system. I think we have had no action since the 1990s on this. So I just personally, I know others think otherwise, but I don't think a mandatory buyback system is the way to go. And it's also, we have to look at this. Like yesterday I was in Montana, 25th anniversary of, I had a 11-year-old nephew shot and killed on a playground by a 10-year-old. At the time, it was the youngest schoolyard shooting in the country. Now, if a 10-year-old shot an 11-year-old, it wouldn't even make national news. But I think that also, when we look at this, we got to say it's not just a binary issue, meaning it's not just about the guns for the challenges that we have.
For Democrats who don't own guns, people who live in cities where guns are scary things, they look at your NRA ratings. I think they range from 40% to 57% over the course of your career.
Yeah.
How are they may say that will work in November, but how will that work in February in Iowa or New Hampshire?
I think it will, because we have hit this point where I think gun owners and non-gun owners alike know that we have to make a difference. Yeah, if someone won't vote for me because I own a firearm and I enjoy hunting with my family and enjoy the ethic of what that is, teaching my son from the very beginning about fair choice, that I can't change. But I think also that we've got to recognize that we've got to be able to, if we're really finally going to, if we can ever address this as a public health issue and not a political issue, we've got to be able to turn around and say that not only do we have to bring a person in downtown New York that's never even seen a firearm other than on TV, but we have to bring that hunter in rural Iowa that says that I don't want to have to worry about my kids not being safe.
If you screened with the NRA now, what score do you think you would get?
I don't know. Let's not kid ourselves. Every time that I've run, the head of the NRA has come out and said, Bullock's horrible, he wants to take away all our guns, no matter what the C rating was they gave me one time. First time I ran for Attorney General, all the ads were, Steve wants to take away guns on some public lands, because I said, I don't think guns in schools really make sense. But that's the problem, is that it's hard to have
the logical, meaningful discussion about how we can better keep people safe when all the NRA wants to do is use this as a political bludgeon to divide us. And we don't even know where that money's coming from, funding that organization.
Let's talk about political money. You have raised the issue in your campaign of dark money. What has been effective on that, if anything, in Montana, and is it possible to nationalize some of those strategies?
The answer is yes, at least from my perspective. Yeah, quick background was Attorney General when Citizens United came up. I wrote the brief that the majority of states, including 4 or 5 Republican AGs, signed on and said, if you're going to mess with this whole thing, don't mess with the state elections, because that's where the vast majority of elections happen. And the influences could really, just even the threat of this spending could corrupt our overall system. Then took the first case up to the U.S. Supreme Court after Citizens United as well. And even had testimony of that from former Republican statewide office holders, again saying even the threat of this could mess things up. Since Citizens United, there's been a greater and greater amount of money that's spent by groups that we don't even know where that money's coming from. Like prior to Citizens United, about 2% of all outside spending was from groups that don't disclose their donors. Now it's over half. And steps that we took in Montana to address that is, even with at the time my legislature was 2/3 Republican, passed a law that said, I don't care if you call yourself Americans for America, whatever it is. If you're going to spend in our elections 90 days out, you have to disclose every dollar being spent. And that actually made it so even Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers, stopped spending during that 90-day window. If we could do that in Montana, we ought to be able to do it other places. I'm the only state in the country, I did an executive order that said, if you want to contract with the state of Montana, I can't keep you from spending or contributing to influence my elections. But you have to disclose all those expenses if you want to contract. Think about it, the biggest purchaser of goods and services in the United States is the federal government. I do that day one for 2 reasons. One of which is that, if elected officials are going to be kind of like NASCAR, sponsored by all kinds, we ought to know who's doing the sponsoring. I think even the sunshine and transparency till we could overturn Citizens United will change some spending behavior in our elections. And all of this is about, most folks might not think, okay, the most important issue is corrupting and influence money in our system. But they do see when the economy's not working for them are so many of the priorities that Democrats are talking about through this primary, the reason why we haven't made advances, that's everything from prescription drug prices to climate, is in part because of these influences.
Every time you put something in place, though, that might restrict spending for political donors, or they just adjust, right? I mean, isn't that 90-day window just an invitation to these groups to plan a little further ahead and make their TV buys out a little sooner and still spend every dime that they would have spent on dark money, but just not be spending them in the last 90 days?
But think about Iowa as an example. Think about how many times the real leader of your caucus arose in the last 35 days before the primary. Because folks right now, their lives are too busy to care about this stuff. So if at least you can make that 90-day window where anything that's going to be spent is disclosed, it's going to add significantly to elections being about what they ought to be, about people talking to people, not the outside groups and the sort of scary looking ads.
Do you pursue a constitutional amendment?
I'd love to see the 28th Amendment.
To overturn Citizens United?
Yeah, I think Citizens United was one of, when you look at sort of destructive to the institutions of representative democracy, one of the most destructive things that's certainly happened in my lifetime. And I'd love to see a constitutional amendment. But I also don't think that, I think the Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced in 1923. We can't wait just for a constitutional amendment. We have to take other steps too.
Well, the Constitutional Convention process people feel like that's fraught with peril, that you could end up with constitutional amendments that you don't.
You could do it without a convention still, but
Yeah.
but there's also like, look, the same day that Trump was with Putin in Helsinki, his Secretary of Treasury said, we're going to get rid of this little rule that requires the IRS to even collect the names of donors to these dark money groups. I mean, that rule had been around since Richard Nixon, who wasn't the model of transparency, right? So that's one where we can't just sit here and take it. I actually brought an action in federal court and we won on that one.
How do you, speaking of Scandinavia, how do you feel about Greenland? You would like to own it?
Please go to, I set up a website, isgreenlandforsale.com. Yeah, I mean, like, where is this? But that's, I mean, that's just part of this. I think people are exhausted. They're exhausted with the behavior that he's normalized. They're exhausted with the way he's divided us by race and geography and gender, and where all this comes from, it's hard to say.
Well, I mean, in some cases, it seems like he's just trying to set traps for Democrats. I mean, you've spoken out against the Trump administration's new rule that it probably puts green cards out of reach of people who have ever had public assistance. And he's probably calculating that's a losing position for you and other Democrats in the general election. I mean, why are you concerned about it?
Well, I am concerned that we as Democrats and you in the media and everyone else spend the next year and a half talking about Donald Trump as opposed to talking about folks in Iowa who are worried about their rural hospital closures or worried about, how can I continue to plant soybeans if I'm going to lose money? So, I have also spoken out saying I think the biggest problem right now with our overall immigration system is Donald Trump, because he is using it to not only rip families apart, but try to rip our country apart. We do need comprehensive immigration. I believe we need a safe and secure border. We don't have to, do this 18th century solution of a wall to get there. But
did the Gang of Eight bill?
I think that would have got us a long way. Yeah.
Are there significant differences in your approach from?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's pretty darn close. But even think about, one of the things that's always challenging too, and to your point, is that, like, at the same time that the president was tweeting about 4 duly elected members of Congress sitting there as people were chanting, "Send her back for 12 seconds." We spent 2.5 weeks talking about that at the same time that his Justice Department was in federal court trying to rip away health coverage for pre-existing conditions, or he pointed someone to the Bureau of Land Management that's been trying to sell off federal lands the whole time, or Betsy DeVos, they're trying to further privatize public education. So we got to make sure this election's about not Donald Trump, but about the government could actually function and make people's lives better.
You, along with other governors, have tried to make the case in this race that you've been able to actually do some of the things that other candidates are actually talking about. But so far, the governors haven't gotten a lot of traction with that message. Most of the attention has been on the Washington politicians. How do you break through that, and is that
Sure.
Is it just a matter of time, or is there a different strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think part is right that the nationalization of elections. Like, I just got done being National Governor Association chair too. I've spent 10 years of my time in public office almost avoiding cable television, right? Because in part it's about conflict. Welcome. So I think in part that's where the attention has gone, because that's who's covered more than anything else. But I continue to believe that being outside of Washington, D.C., where I can't just give speeches or say, wasn't that a great tweet because it really made a difference in people's lives, but where I have to actually get health care for people or make sure that we have quality education or enforce environmental laws. I think that's something that, at the end of the day, that the voters look to as a premium. And if we went back a handful of years ago, I mean, 31 days out, John Kerry was at 4 points in Iowa. Al Sharpton was beating him. Iowans are the ones that take this so darn seriously, which is a good thing, and take a large field down to a much smaller one. And that's not the national attention. That's people are up and down and on and on. I mean, I fully expect to be there in the caucuses and do well. Could I have gotten in earlier? Not really, because my legislature was still meeting. But think about it, like we're in a time where 6 of the candidates actually started their candidacy for presidency when the federal government was shut down. You know, I think that people expect government to work and work for them.
Do you want to, anybody want to jump in before we move on to healthcare?
I wanted to ask,
Please.
you're thinking on running for the Senate rather than for president. You know, they say, you know, none of the good things any of the presidential candidates want to do will happen unless the Democrats flip the Senate next year.
Yeah, and first I'd push back on that in as much as that if we're convinced the only way to get things done is only through Democrats, I mean, healthcare for 100,000 people, kicking dark money out of our elections, freezing college tuition, record investments in our education system. That's when my legislature's been more Republican than yours. So, yes, I try to build relationships with my Republican legislators, but I don't rely on those relationships alone. I actually go out into the communities and get folks talking to legislators. So I'm not willing to just accept that, oh, the only way you'll ever get anything done anymore is to have majorities in both houses, because if so, that's a pretty sad statement for what representative democracy has become. And to the, you know, I'll bet you, with all respect, you can name 8 office holders in Montana. You know, I think part of the focus comes, we're gonna have good candidates to run for US Senate, and I'll do everything I can to support those candidates. But for me, it was never an either or proposition. I'll either run for one or the other. Long ago, I said, I won't be running for US Senate. I think we should also be talking about not just the Montana, Colorado, and Texas, but let's talk about North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, places that we just lost Democratic senators. And if we're a party that can only connect with the coasts, we're never going to change what Iowa is right now with 2 Republican houses and the governor, which is now 22 states. If we actually want to win back those places, it might be a good idea to have somebody at the top of the ticket that's actually won in a red state.
If you win as president, but you don't have 60 Democratic votes in the Senate, I mean, it doesn't really matter whether Mitch McConnell is the majority leader or the minority leader. If he decides he wants to stop everything that's happening in the Senate,
well,
he could do that. I mean, how do you?
If he was the minority leader, yeah. I mean, I'd ask right away to try to get rid of the filibuster rule. I don't think it's nothing more than the status quo. And if you turn around and say, like, initially when I said that, somebody said, well, just think what would have happened in the first 2 years of Trump. They would have gotten rid of coverage for pre-existing conditions. They would have gotten rid of closing the Medicare donut hole for prescription drugs. Well, when healthcare is one of the number one issues, at least then the choice would be there. And I think that the next president should spend as much time making his case in Kentucky as he or she should in Washington, D.C. If we can't figure out that the way that folks are at the end of the day duly elected to represent their interests, not just the partisan gridlock, but you got to be willing to make that case to the country. I mean, that's how we got Medicaid expansion through. There's but one example in a time where it's probably the heart of the anti-Obamacare time.
How has Medicaid expansion worked in Montana? Because here in
A
Iowa,
lot better than here.
We've had struggle after
No.
struggle after struggle.
Yeah.
And what have you done?
Sure.
You probably didn't privatize it.
No, we did not privatize it. We haven't even put it into managed care. The states actually run it. And then we've turned around.
How do you control costs then? Can you predict the budget?
Sure.
How do you control that?
No, well, you get the federal part of it, but you can more or less. I mean, the idea, if you say, all right, the most that you can spend on healthcare is $11, and if you have $15 in needs, so what are they going to do? They're going to cut those services. And we're also, I think, the only state in the country that covers dental work in our Medicaid program. We're one of not enough of them that cover vision. And like, I can look at the model of, I know in Montana, we haven't lost a rural hospital when 20% of rural hospitals are at risk. We've actually made meaningful investments. And as an example, got it through in 2015, tried to do it, reauthorize it by ballot initiative because it had sunset. Tobacco companies spent $26 million killing it 2 months before my legislature came in. But part of the case that we made too is that the vast majority of folks on Medicaid are working. 70% are working. They're just not getting paid enough to afford their own health insurance. So at the end of the day, this isn't just taking care of 100,000 folks. It's also taking care of 57% of my employers in the state that have one or more of their employees on Medicaid. So we've said it's important to the economy. It's important for preventative up front. And I also know 30,000 folks have mental health treatment, as an example, that wouldn't. But that's why I couldn't get in early too, because I still had a job to do to make sure that we kept that.
You're not an advocate for Medicare for all. You're putting a public option into the Affordable Care Act. Would you cover dental? Would you cover vision? Which I don't.
In a public option, sure.
In a public option.
And you sure could, right? Because also, like dental especially, this isn't just about cosmetics and hygiene. I mean, if you don't have access to a dentist, that's right into the sort of health issues. But yeah, that's where, I mean, the greatest expansion of healthcare since Medicare was the Affordable Care Act. And I think we can build on that and get to the point of access and affordability for everyone.
The Affordable Care Act exchanges have been a challenge in places like Iowa, where there just haven't been enough private insurers to step up to make sure people have any kind of competition. Is there something that can be done to sort of shore up those exchanges as opposed to just competing with the private insurers through a public?
I think so. And like, I haven't looked at, like, we have in a state that isn't the population of Iowa, it's bigger than states like Vermont and Delaware in population. I'm just saying.
Island.
Yeah, we have three. We have three different, well, two of them. To destabilize, and it's the lack of certainty along the way. Will cost sharing reductions be ripped away? Will all of that's made it that much harder for those entrants into like the exchange to even say this is going to be worth it? And another thing, like even with that legislature that's more Republican than yours, we passed reinsurance, a high risk pool. So we know that premiums on the exchange will probably go down about 8% when it's fully implemented. There are steps you can take to add competition. And I think a public option would really help that, would help drive part of that as well.
For those who are just getting, I've heard you speak about this in public before, but for those who are just getting to know you,
if you look at it, as I noticed, biggest expansion in healthcare was Affordable Care Act. We forget about how big and what a difference that would make. Now 90% of people have coverage. The remaining 25 million people, if you could expand Medicaid in the rest of the country, that'd be about half of them. Then if you could do an automatic buy-in or a public option, you'd get the rest. But I don't think that you get to an overall system that's going to be improved by doing what Republicans have been saying, well, let's just repeal and replace it. You got about 165 million people that have employer-sponsored health insurance. For so many of them, certainly costs can be too high, out-of-network charges, but we can address that without taking away health care from all of them and saying you no longer have that choice. And it would be a tax increase on every family. Think about when we got the ACA through. You know, President Obama said, you like your health plan, you like your doctor, you can keep it. That alone almost tanked it along the way. If you're going to tell 70% of Americans, you like your health plan, you can keep it, oh, no longer you can. I think that's bad policy, and it's bad politics. The politics are that I think once folks dig in a little bit more, it sounds real good, but once folks dig into both consumer choice, what it could do to your overall healthcare plans, that, you know, once you sort of unpack that suitcase, about 2/3 of Americans say, I don't want this.
Do you extend that attitude? As you know, there are candidates in this race who say they
have a lot of that energy for change, right? But that's, I mean, my point, and maybe that's just a different perspective from being outside of Washington, D.C., right? The core of the word progressive is actually making progress in people's lives, making them know that government can possibly impact their economic opportunities. And I don't think that, you know, for a lot of, and I put my record when it comes to dark money, actually improving people's health care, education against anybody in this race. But I do think at times that's the Washington, D.C. will put out this big plan. Doesn't that sound great? Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, have you ever, as governor, proposed something that people said at the beginning, well, that's radical. That's radical.
Well, I'm sure there probably has. And I get, look, with a legislature more Republican than yours, I get the need to negotiate to find a place that works.
I don't know how I feel about you keep talking about it as my legislature.
The collective yours, Iowa. The collective yours. No, you certainly, and I don't get everything that I want. I don't think you have to compromise your values to get things done along the way. But
have you ever deliberately asked for more than you thought you could get?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's in times education funding. That's in, well, I could go in all kinds of different areas. But I also wouldn't turn around and say, well, here's where I'm going to begin, is completely disrupt the lives of 70% of Americans and the system that we built in 40 years. Because I just don't think that's the best policy or the best way to get there.
In what way would a Bullock presidency disrupt the lives in radical ways?
Well, I'd sure as heck hope that what I could do when it comes to that would improve people's lives is making elections about actually the people, not the corporate spending. That would sure disrupt a heck of a lot of people that are counting on Washington, D.C. to just serve their interests. There may be parts, and you know, I said earlier, I've said I'm a former union side labor lawyer, right? Before I got into all of this, represented from teachers to Teamsters, if it's disruption of people's lives to get back to a place where workers can organize and collectively bargain, well, the people that were probably disrupting their lives have been part of making the system to make it so much harder for folks to actually have a fair shot. When it comes to sort of the average Joe and Jane, whoever's average out there, but that was like when, Danelle's probably heard this somewhere, like when I was in Ottumwa and a woman said to me after that first debate, she goes, missing from that voice, she was a retiree, missing from that stage was our voice. I mean, we've got to make sure that we're talking to people about the challenges that they have in the here and now, not something that will say, oh, a decade from now, this plan might work, which is some of the health insurance plans, or we have to actually make them believe that government can address their economic, education, healthcare interests. And I think you can.
What do you have in mind when you say wish list economics?
Well, I think I have in mind plans that are written more for press releases than actually getting things done.
So is that universal health care?
In mind, it's or Medicare for all. I mean, universal health care would be making sure, on the one hand, everybody has access. Look, I had to pay off $175,000 of student debt in today's terms. We've got when you recognize that, okay, could you actually get that attained? And also, 68% of people don't even have a 2-year degree. We're not talking about what are we going to do for them.
You mentioned
Want to stay there, you have to have opportunities to be there. And I think that it's a little bit, there isn't a one size fits all that's going to address this. You got to recognize from the perspective of, in part in Iowa, it's farm prices and infrastructure and what the federal government's going to do to help keep more food dollar here. But it's also, if you lose a hospital, that town's gone. It's healthcare. It's those base economic issues of, $61 billion would make it so that you're connected everywhere digitally, urban and rural, which we have to do. But thinking the internet's going to be enough certainly won't happen. When Nevada turns around, I was in Nevada, I don't know, a week or two ago, and they said, USDA, I think it's Rural Water Services, are keeping us from even being able to expand. The federal government actually has to be a partner in trying to provide both economic, healthcare, and agricultural interests in our rural community, recognizing A, one size isn't going to fit all, and B, a gain of an employer of 8 people in a small town, it might not matter much in Des Moines, but it matters a lot in Mount Pleasant.
how much disruption in people's lives is going to be necessary to turn around the climate change?
God forbid we actually followed science in this, and right now we have an administration that's trying to get rid of all their scientists. We have to be net zero emissions by 2050 as a world. I think you can do it by 2040 and even earlier by taking a number of steps. Certainly rejoining Paris, funding those commitments. The president today is lashing out at the auto industry because there's like, no, we want to meet those efficiency standards, both from agriculture to the grid in the West, making federal investments along the way to help this process along. We can view it as an opportunity, and it's an opportunity like, look at you in Iowa, what you've done with renewables. It's ended up great for employers, great for your carbon footprint. We can look at it as what is a real opportunity, but I think there's things missing at times along the way, at least two, one of which, go back, George H.W. Bush, right, said we'll address the greenhouse effect of the White House effect. The Republican Party is the only conservative party in the world that doesn't acknowledge climate change is real anymore. And that's because of Koch brothers, the spending, everything.
How do you depoliticize that? You mentioned scientists driving the conversation, but
Well,
people don't, a certain segment of the population doesn't believe
Sure,
scientists
sure,
anymore.
but no, that's the dark money influence that's made it so Republicans can see what's happening. A Republican in the West knows that the fire season is 78 days longer today than it was 40 years ago. So we have to address that. But to your point of, is this an opportunity or a hardship? I think that's one of the challenges at times when Democrats are talking about the need to address climate change. When I was running in 2016, it was somebody, a worker, that had said, I'm with you, but I don't know if they, being the Democrats, are always with me. Because we have this tendency at times to talk about like folks that have spent their whole life powering this country to suggest that they're part of the problem. So what we have to do is make sure that as we go through this transition, I've doubled my wind, quadrupled my solar in Montana. As we go through that, we're not leaving communities behind, because that way then it will be viewed as a greater opportunity.
Half the country right now maybe associates the Green New Deal with socialism. And that they see, some of the efforts to use the Green New Deal as, an economic tool is,
No, sure.
Threatening.
Was it Eric Gittens? Is it somebody like that, a new legislator? This is long before I got in. That when he was running a special election, I had somebody come up and say, "Oh, are you one of those Democrats that want to get rid of all the cows?" I mean, it's one of these things where, no, they've been painting it that way, right? And I don't think most folks in America have even read the Green New Deal, all 4 pages that it is. But I think most folks, probably in Iowa, who dealt with the flooding season this time, most folks in this country know that we can't wait another 35, 40 years to take action. And there are steps that we can take now, immediate and durable, that can actually enhance our economy. It's not just a punitive side.
Is it realistic though to tell people, we can do this?
Don't think that the way to do this is go back to Jimmy Carter and say, turn your thermostat down to 65 or whatever it is full time. I think that you can turn around and say, I mean, things like, look, one of the biggest issues that we have is even fill our efficiency losses. Like if you were actually going to have a meaningful infrastructure job program and say, our biggest losses, the biggest use is that energy that should have never been used because you don't have even sufficient insulation in your house. There are steps that you can take. But what's the alternative is what? To say, oh, there's nothing we can do, the magnitude of the problem is too big. Unfortunately, we've been doing that too darn long.
I want to make sure we talk about trade. Is the USMCA, is it a good deal? Is it a better deal than what we had with NAFTA?
So it's probably a better deal than we had with NAFTA. It's not good enough. I mean, I get that the NAFTA was created before we had this thing called the internet, right? We should be up. I mean, the uncertainty and instability of this administration, even when all the govs were back in DC, it was like probably February or March. And the president was saying, yeah, well, even if we get USMCA, we're still going to keep these tariffs on. I mean, how can you be anybody could think that this is really going to be a trusted partner to negotiate with?
And speaking of tariffs, the news keeps getting worse for farmers in Iowa and presumably in your state.
On India, we've lost market share. Brazil's come in and taken that. Your farmers in Iowa say, I don't want another payment from the federal government because I know that I'm not going to have that market share afterwards. So I think where we begin, candidly, is by getting a new president. Now, you do need to be tough on China. Like, look, what they're doing to us in tech right now, they did it 25 years ago with steel, they did it with credit cards, they did it with microchips. But you can't do this saying like, America first has become America alone. He just says, I'll use this blunt instrument of tariffs and it'll take care of everything. Well, it's not just your farmers and ranchers that are getting hit. Every American consumer is going to get hit. And he doesn't get, A, that we are paying for this, and B, at the same time that's what he does, say we're going to use tariffs. Well, China's actually lowering the tariffs for other folks in the country. So they're getting in there easier. Not even counting the global instability this is causing toward a recession. So the way that you approach it going forward isn't thinking that you alone as the United States of America can change tech practices and other practices, that you actually have to bring in the global community.
Some in your party would say that farmers and ranchers, that the incentives are all wrong and that they should be encouraged for more sustainable local food production, help people overseas grow their own local food instead of chasing trade all the time, which
Well,
may not be a long-term.
There are parts that, I don't disagree with the fact that Steve King's congressional district, one of the second most fertile districts in the nation, has, I think, 2 farm-to-table places. And we need to figure out ways to keep more of our food dollar here. But as an example in Montana, if Montanans had to eat all the wheat we produce, every living Montana would have to eat 40 loaves of bread a day. True story. We have 5.
But the argument then is that you shouldn't be growing that much wheat. You should.
But sure you should, because it's quality wheat and folks want it. We've got to recognize that the U.S. has 5% of the world's population. We can't just say forget about the rest of the world, and that's for trade and everything else. But there are ways that you can make it a heck of a lot fairer for our farmers and our ranchers and our producers. And I think that, one of the challenges has been to generally, capital can go across borders pretty darn easily. Be it whether you're a manufacturer or a farmer, you can. So we've got to figure out ways where sort of that side of it isn't the stepchild to just GDP or trade growth when we're doing international deals.
What was the other question?
One of the things I've been thinking about is I've heard you speak here and elsewhere.
Attorney General in 2008 wasn't supposed to win a three-way primary. That's when Obama and Clinton were running. Even though we had a June primary, we had the Clintons and the Obamas in Montana enough because they thought it could go all the way down that I'd like to just work the line and then say, I don't need to hear that. So Barack Obama, Senator Obama, one of his first endorsees was Tom Miller, too, your Attorney General. Senator Obama wraps up the nomination come 4th of July in 2008. Could have been in Martha's Vineyard, he could have been raising money somewhere. He brought his family to Butte, America. Butte is a town where, in Montana, once was the Copper Kings that controlled all the elections. Now it's the largest Superfund site in the country. On the one hand, there was no electoral advantage for Senator Obama to go to Butte. But it spoke about places like Butte all across the country, that this guy cares about me, will listen, and will help my lives. If we can't do that as Democrats, well, if this becomes just an elitist discussion where folks don't think that we're going to help them, we're not going to win. Because I do believe that people 12 weeks ago. This is 10 or 11 trip to Iowa since then. My experiences along the way have been that Iowans take this very, very seriously. And like I often joke, oh, I'm the only candidate that you've met. But only in as much as that they take it seriously and they discern through both who would be the best nominee for our party to win, but also then, once we leave, come February, Iowa Democrats are still dealing with the fact a third of their counties went Obama, Trump. And if you're going to deal with the fact that your education system isn't being funded as it was, or the privatization of Medicaid, or so many of these things, you gotta have somebody that can help along the way. I think I can do that, and I think that it's actually Iowans about 155 days from today that get to make that decision and take this big field small. So I've so enjoyed my time in the state so far, not just because my mother was born in Ottumwa, or my great-great-grandparents settled in 1850 here in Iowa, not those attenuated connections. So enjoyed my time in your state so far, and I so appreciate that you all take it very seriously, and I hope you'll give me a good look, and maybe even look at stevebullock.com.
All right.